Welcome to another episode of Budget Save and Invest. Today I've got Nero with me. Nero, how you doing?
I'm well, mate. How about yourself, Ross?
Not too bad, not too bad. If you want to just
Good.
give yourself a quick intro to those that haven't or don't know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I run a buyer's agency by the name of Investment Rise. That's sort of a business that's been going since 2016. We really help people who are looking to invest in property, sort of that sweet spot between about sort of 600,000 to 1.1 million, which, say, for someone in Sydney, doesn't really get you very far. So, where's the best place to invest? And that's really what we do. We can help clients buy anywhere nationally, and all this really comes from my own investing experience, which started all the way back in 2002. So I'm probably revealing my age when I kind of say that, Ross.
Do you want to give? I actually don't know this, so tell me a little bit about your own investment portfolio, investment experience.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So 2002, decided to get involved in investing. Young kid in my 20s, came out of uni, thought I knew how the world worked. And again, living in Sydney at the time, even then, couldn't afford a house in Sydney. Everyone said, well, if you can't afford a house, you buy a 2-bedroom unit in Western Sydney or in Melbourne. That's what you do. And because I have an economics background, the first thing that sort of struck me as weird with that is, but hold on, they can build lots of towers, and it was much easier back then than it is now, but still, they can always increase supply. So how can I expect capital growth if, there's no supply constraints? Of course, everyone said, look, you don't know what you're talking about. You're young. This is what you do. But kind of being a bit, I guess, having a bit of an edge to me, I guess, I decided, look, I'm just going to go do this on my own. So I went and bought my first property back then all the way over in WA. Right, I think I paid 190 something thousand dollars for it at the time. Most people thought I was bonkers. I lost my marbles, but to their surprise, and I guess slightly to mine, 18 months later, I ended up doubling my money. Right, and that's what kind of went, holy cow, this actually can work if we kind of get this right in terms of analyzing supply and demand fundamentals. And that took me on a journey that, I wish I could tell you every property I bought, Ross, worked out. It didn't. I tried a number of things. I said, I thought I just knew how everything worked. So I made a few mistakes. And so by the time I started my investing journey, and not my investing journey, but when I started the business in 2016, clients often ask me, so tell us about a client who you have, failed with, or someone who hasn't, done well. And I'd say, well, you're looking at him because I've made every mistake under the sun. And so now a big part of what I do is sort of help people avoid some of those painful mistakes because, yes, I have tremendous certainty now from property investing, and I've got, a portfolio that's, yes, in the millions, sure. However, I started young. And, and as painful as it was, I had time to recover. But even if you're in your mid-30s, certainly mid-40s or afterwards, most people, it's not just the money they lose when they make a bad investment, it's the time they lose. They just don't have that to recover.
Yeah, time's a really important one. I always say to people, your first investment, even if you don't necessarily use a buyer's agent for any future investments, God, if you've got the money to do it for the first one, it'll take your portfolio to the next level. Because if you buy the first one wrong, and that puts you on a path where you can't do anything for the next 2 years or 3 years, that's 2 or 3 years that you've lost where you could have potentially bought another 3 or 4 properties had you had the right strategy from the outset. So I desperately try with clients, especially obviously like from my background being the broker, I can see their funds position. I know what they've got available to them. And a lot of it is really to do with that education piece of going through that first property investment with the people that have done it before.
Yep.
And that's not to say that, every buyer's agent is a good one. I always find that you got to talk to the ones that have portfolios.
Yes.
Like yourself,
Yes.
you've got a portfolio, you've done it, you've made all the mistakes. Therefore,
Yep.
you've got your 5,000, 10,000 hours of expertise that you can go
Yep.
back to that person and you can say, well, I've done all this and I've done it all wrong as well.
Yes.
So I've
Yes.
learned everything. And you don't have to make those mistakes. We can just get this ball rolling, and you can benefit from the outset of my expertise.
Absolutely. It's, I'm very open by saying, my journey has not been all golden. It hasn't been perfect at all, but that's your benefit because you don't have to make those mistakes. I've made them. I know where they lead. It doesn't matter what anyone says. I can see the writing on the wall, having already walked that path. And it's just because I've been doing it so long, Ross, nothing else.
Yeah, yeah. And what strategies would you say your brokerage, I suppose, sorry, buyer's agency,
Mm.
what's the key one that you kind of focus in on?
Yeah, ultimately it's capital growth. I think in Australia, property investing is a capital growth game initially, and however people say, yeah, well, that's great, but if I'm buying a property at $2,000 negative per month, how do I end up building financial freedom? How do I get passive income coming through? And what I always say is the pathway to positive cash flow in Australia is through capital growth. And then normally people go, what does that mean? I say, well, look, when you're buying a property and it's rising in value, if you've done it correctly, you're also going to see your rents rise over time, right? So you might start off X negative, whatever that X is, but over time that's going to reduce. And then you can get yourself into a position where you can buy a subsequent property. And you may end up over a few years having multiple properties, but then you don't need to and should not ever expect that you're going to own every single property that you buy. It'd be nice. And I know a lot of people online say, hey, buy a property every year for 10 years and never ever sell. And that might have worked when prices were 300 grand in Australia. But these days, most capital cities, you don't get much change from, $1 million or even 800 grand. So at some point, it does make sense to maybe sell, a certain portion of your property portfolio strategically to pay down debt, to free up cash flow, to end up reaching those financial, freedom goals that people are after.
Yeah, and I think for those listening that they're a bit on the fence about that rent versus mortgage situation. There's a lot of strategies that brokers can do in order to ensure that you've got buffers in place.
Yes.
So let's say you are short by $500 a month or even $1,000 a month. Let's make sure that you've got 2 to 3 years worth of buffer. So it doesn't actually come from your income or your cash flow, but there might be $20,000 to $30,000 just sitting there in the offset account, and that's eating into itself essentially. But
Yep.
you're getting more than that each year in capital growth.
Yes, exactly.
So it's important. It's important to do that, and like you say, trying to get multiple assets really is the key, because
very much so.
In 10 years time or 20 years time, once those assets have compounded, and and if you buy in the right place, especially in Australia, because there's such demand for housing, if you buy in the right area, every 7 to 10 years it might double in price.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
effectively, if you got to the 10-year point, you could look at your portfolio, say you've got 4 assets at that point, you could sell down 2 and pay off the other 2 theoretically, or fully offset the other 2.
Exactly.
And if you held on for another 10 years and they doubled again, you might be able to sell down 2, pay off the other 2, and pay off your owner occupied property if you've got one as well.
Yep. Exactly.
But there's a lot.
Exactly.
You just got to get in, right? You got to get into the market. And yeah, I suppose let's talk about that actually. So what would you say to someone who's sitting there now? Maybe they're sitting on cash savings of anywhere between $60,000 and $160,000. They don't have an asset yet, and they keep procrastinating over property prices potentially dropping or rates coming down. What sort of advice would you give to that individual?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Ross. I think the biggest question I get from prospective clients is, how is the market and is now a good time to buy, right? Okay, yes, I'm a buyer's agent. People might say, okay, you're skewed in what you say, but I think what's recently happened, especially in the last 48 hours, has been we've seen the new budget come out. And what we've seen from the federal budget is essentially they have a couple of initiatives like the Help to Buy scheme, and they're also keeping migration levels well above long-term averages. What that's going to mean is that we have more demand for property, and that demand is going to be sustainable and long-term. On the flip side, we are nowhere near building enough properties. So for anyone who's thinking, should I buy now or should I wait until prices correct? I think we have categorical evidence now that there's going to be no price correction in this country. Prices are going to keep rising on average across the country. That does not mean they're going to buy or increase everywhere. If you go buy, maybe a 2-bedroom apartment like the Docklands or somewhere in central Melbourne or wherever, there's so much supply you might struggle to get that growth. But if you can sort of focus on areas where demand is higher than supply, so land is in tight supply, prices are going to rise when there's demand from owner occupiers. So I just think that the longer people wait, the more expensive prices are going to get, the more they're going to miss out on.
Yeah, I mean, we have this conversation all the time. We have clients that will go through 3 pre-approvals, 9 months worth of pre-approvals, and suddenly the needle's moved
Yeah.
substantially in Australia.
Yep.
And for a lot of people, that they're not moving across to Australia, they might not know what the market is like over here.
Mm, mm,
If you're from places in Europe, UK, the Middle East, or America,
mm.
it doesn't have the same level of aggressiveness that the Australian market does. And the government, they need people to turn over properties because they make most of their money from stamp duty and
Yes.
capital gains tax, like over
Yes.
50% of it. So it's a bit of a sport over here, and it's a
Yes.
sport that you need to know about because it is extremely lucrative if you're in the market, and it can be extremely stressful if you're not.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you need to live in the property that you purchase.
Correct.
So for a lot of people that live in expensive cities, in good locations, it's cheaper to rent the property that they want to live in and then
Mm.
buy the asset interstate or in other areas, where their money's invested. So you can
Absolutely.
feel guilt free at that point, right? You've got your money invested somewhere. It might be in Queensland or WA or South Australia, wherever the hell it might be. But at least you know that renting your place in Sydney or in some hotspots in Brisbane or Melbourne, wherever it might be, you can know that your assets are growing elsewhere. So
100%.
I suppose, what areas are you typically looking in at the moment? What are you seeing good growth in?
Yep.
Where are your sort of, I suppose, hotspots at the moment?
Absolutely. Just going back to finish off what you were saying before, I'm seeing a lot of clients right now who are, sort of, a little bit younger, kind of going, look, I don't want to buy the expensive home. I'll rent by the beach. And then they'll go and, use their money to buy elsewhere. And that whole adage, like when I grew up, was rent money is dead money. I think it is if you don't do anything with it. But if you do something with it, then yes, I think it can definitely be a very different situation where your money's actually working harder for you. And so from that perspective, Ross, what I'd be saying is really, the best places to look to be buying in right now is, again, look, budget sensitive, but again, for me, sort of that 600 to 1.1 million dollar range. Where are you looking at? I definitely think there's a lot of regional markets. I think regional parts of regional Queensland have still got a lot more to go. I think Victoria is finally, finally, after so many years, finally starting to show some green shoots there as well. I think South Australia, it's a market that many people kind of overlook, still has a lot going for it. So lots and lots of areas there to look at. I mean, there's a suburb in Melbourne that is very hot called, Frankston, close to the water. And that just seems to be going up ridiculously. You were getting properties for under 600 grand just, less than 12 months ago. And now, good luck hitting that kind of budget. So definitely understanding that there are opportunities out there and tracking where people wanting to move to live. And as an investor, buying where they want to live, that's really going to, maximize your chances of winning this game.
Yeah, yeah, and interesting you say that because there is a lot of data coming out now because since COVID,
Mm.
especially, um, people can work from home. There's a lot of remote work nowadays, and there's a lot of internal migration, not just migration from other countries coming in
Mm.
because we need skilled people over in Australia, but there is also a lot of people that are going, I don't want to pay Sydney prices anymore, so
Yeah,
I'm going to move somewhere else. But they're
that's right.
still getting Sydney wages.
That's right.
But it creates demand because when someone moves, they don't necessarily buy immediately. They need to rent somewhere.
Yep.
And I think there's this misconception that everyone wants to own the place that they live in. There's a lot of people that don't.
Mm.
Um,
Mm. Yeah.
I don't. I rent my place. I like to be flexible. I'm
Yeah.
still young. Things might change. So having an investment portfolio and renting gives me more flexibility about where I want to be. Maybe there's a new school that's better for my kids to go to, so I can move into that catchment area and go to that school. Um, or there might be other opportunities in other states later down the line, especially if you're in your 20s or
Mm.
30s. You've probably got a bit more flexibility around job changes and trying out new areas and things like that. So I think there's also this mindset of, oh, I'm renting, I'm the
Mm,
poor renter.
mm.
And we need to change that, because really, for a lot of the people I work with, some of the wealthiest people I know, they still rent.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's a tax deduction for the,
Yep.
because if they work from home, they can save up to 20% or 25%, depending on whatever it might be,
Hmm.
on the actual cost of renting. And then they've got all these tax deductible assets all over the country. And really, it's a tax benefit. Um,
Yeah. I
so
mean, look,
yeah, it is. Yeah.
it's not new. I mean, again, I that's how I started. I was, renting initially. I had multiple properties, and then once I realized, okay, this is where I want to live or what I want, then I, recycled properties around. And I remember it was the investment properties that, because they'd grown in value, that helped me buy my own home more easily. So this is not anything new, but I think it is really breaking down that mindset of, as I said, the poor renter or rent money is dead. As I said, it's only dead if you don't do anything else. But if you can do what you need to have the lifestyle that you want, if that means renting where you want to live, great, and then buy where makes the best sense for you from an investment perspective, you're winning the lifestyle game, you're winning the money game. To me, what else is there?
Yeah, yeah, and it is a bit of a mindset shift, because if you are moving over from other, I think, Joe, you were talking about this earlier, is there is a lot
Mm.
of young investors
Yes,
that
very much so.
have a better understanding of this rent vesting idea,
Hmm.
and they're doing the sensible thing. They're staying at home.
Yep.
They're buying multiple assets
Mm.
in their 20s,
Mm.
and then they've got all of these options later on. They can go and buy. They could sell down some of the portfolio. They can go and buy their own occupier.
Yep.
Um, they've got more cash flow, because they
Yep.
might have built a portfolio fairly quickly, because they've got no expenses. They've got
Mm.
huge borrowing power.
Yep.
I see this in a lot of the mining areas.
Hmm.
I see this in young professionals that are making, anywhere between $100 to $150,000, and you're putting in minimal rent.
Hmm.
So it's like $500 a month. You go and rent somewhere for $1,000 a week, suddenly your borrowing power diminishes
Yep.
incredibly.
Yep.
But really smart. Like, I've got a few people now and they're of that podcast era.
Yes. Yes.
They're
Yes.
listening to things, they're watching things on YouTube. Sometimes they do come to you with too much information and
Yeah.
too many ideas, and you need
Yes.
to you need to you need to do a re-education piece, because there is a lot of noise out there.
Yes.
But super keen. They understand it. But there is that bracket between 30 and 40. I do find that when you get people migrating across to Australia that have come from places like the UK,
Hmm.
and there is this mindset of, you get your owner occupier, you pay it off over 30 years, and that's it. Um,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
understanding that Australia has all these benefits, tax benefits, offset accounts. There's so many ways to pay down your loan quicker over here or get ahead.
Yes.
It's just, there's so many ways to build a portfolio and get long-term generational wealth. I think it's important for more people to understand that it's possible. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
I was just speaking to a client just yesterday. She's young. She's 27. She bought a property at 24 with my help. She's now got sitting on $300,000 worth of equity in 3 years. Her partner, boyfriend, did it on his own as well without help. He's sitting on like $250,000. So this is a couple. She's 27. He's 28. They got $500,000 worth of equity. Sitting there, and she's trying to tell her parents that they need to invest. But the fact is, like, the younger generation understand the rent vesting or staying at home and getting their money to work for them. Done correctly, it works. I mean, this couple, they can now pretty much give it another couple of years. They can go live wherever they want, buy whatever they want. And yet they live such simple lifestyles, but they are significantly wealthier than the average person just because they've used investing for their benefit.
yeah. And once you get the first one and you go through
Mm.
that education piece, I always say to people, they're like, well, we'll talk in a year's time. I said, you'll be calling me in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
I know that we're going to have this conversation, because the rent starts coming in. They
Yep.
see that the mortgage repayment isn't as bad as they thought it was going to be. They adjust the way that they look into it. If we put buffers in place, it's very,
Yep.
very easy to keep going.
Yep.
And suddenly we're like, oh, can we get a revaluation on the property early? we'd
Yes.
like to release some equity and we'd go again.
Yes.
And it's surprising how quickly that you can build a portfolio. A lot of people call us first time and they'll say, I just want to get to the point where I've got 2 or 3
Mm,
properties paid off.
mm,
This, that would be my dream scenario. And suddenly within 2 or 3 years, they've already hit their 5 to 10 year target of what they thought they would achieve.
yep. Yep.
Because, suddenly you build up all this equity. Like a lot of
Mm,
the guys that had properties in Perth over the last 2
mm,
years, like,
mm.
wow, what a run
Yes.
that's been
Exactly.
on.
Yes.
Um, so we had a couple average income earners, combined salary of 180. They had 3 assets.
Okay.
Um, they didn't think they could keep all 3, so we had he had the male applicant had 1 asset, female applicant had 1 asset. They were moving in together.
Okay.
So I said, do you want to keep your assets? You could effectively be in a position here where you've got 3 properties.
Mm,
Oh, we didn't know we could do that. So we released equity from 1. That was the deposit for their new owner occupied property.
yep.
And then we did a portfolio check 12 months later and they made $400,000 in 12 months.
I love stories like that, right? But it's
God.
actually more common than most people realize because, like
Yeah.
those those 2 people that you mentioned, they're not going to go tell anyone, right? They're probably in many cases they're kind of somewhat embarrassed that they've happened. They don't know how it happened. They've just got the right team of people behind them, the right advice, and they've got the results. And they kind of go, "We're just going to keep it quiet because we don't actually know how we did it." And I think that's very much the case where I see so many of our clients who happy to with the results will keep buying, but don't really tell their friends and family how many properties they have or how well they're doing because they don't feel like they need to. Then they've got to explain themselves, and they should never have to. So it's far more common than I think the average person realizes.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's I think there is an element of tall poppy syndrome in
Yeah.
Australia. Like people, they see other people doing well, especially in that mid-level job.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of internal discussions and chats around the
Hmm.
barbecue and things like that, and uh, it can be done by anyone. It's just you've got
Yeah.
to take action. And I try saying this to people all the time. If you're surrounded by the right professionals, the right mortgage broker, the right buyer's agent, the right accountant, the right financial advisor, and the right solicitors,
Mm.
if you can get that A team of professionals around you,
Yes.
you can accelerate. You can accelerate way quicker than you could doing it on your own. Um,
Absolutely.
and it's really important to just feel like you should be able to be like, yeah, I've got 4 properties and I did
Mm.
this all myself, and we're on normal salaries, we're a normal family with a couple of kids and a dog, and we've done it. It's just the taking action that is really crucial, and not procrastinating, because you've got to get the first one, you've got to go through the education piece, you've got to understand it,
Yep.
and then that will lead on to your next one, or whatever your goal
Exactly.
might be. And I try
Exactly.
and say to people, you got to maybe think 20 years ahead,
Mm.
30 years ahead, think about that retirement figure that you want, and then work backwards from there.
Yep.
Do you want to retire on 150 grand a year? Do you want to retire on 200 grand a year or 250 grand? Okay, what does that look like? Talk to your buyer's agent, your strategist, talk to your financial advisor, have a chat with your broker. How do we piece this together? And go
Yep.
from there. So I think it's really important to have a goal in mind, not just
Yes.
necessarily getting on. Getting
Yes.
on is always key. You got to get
Yeah.
on, but
Yes.
after that, you got to have you got to have a good goal in mind. What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to achieve? That's really,
Yep.
really important.
Yep,
So
absolutely. Very much so. And I think, really for people, I think one of the biggest things and why it's scary is property in Australia, it's an expensive purchase, right? It's always been considered expensive. And so, whenever something's expensive and they're putting a lot of money in it, it doesn't take much for someone to kind of, put them off buying because there's fear, it's so expensive, prices have to correct, blah, blah, blah. But if you look through the data objectively, the fact is, I said, property is a very safe game in most areas around Australia, especially if you get the right advice.
yeah, exactly. Right, we're going to wrap this episode up. I've got
Sweet.
3 questions from our budget save and invest audience.
Okay.
So I just want your feedback, your thoughts on this. So first question. We're looking at buying a house in Melbourne. Is it important to get a building and pest inspection? Electrical, plumbing inspections done. And when do we time this? Do we time this during the cooling off period, before we make an offer, or after we've made an offer? What are your thoughts? Please help.
Okay. The first part of the question is very easy. Yes, get a building and pest inspection done. I will never, ever, 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 ever buy a property for myself or for a client without getting it done. It doesn't matter even if you've seen the property, you don't know what's behind the walls. So that's the easy part. Definitely get it done. How do you time it? Look, depending on exactly what suburb you're buying in, how strong that suburb is, and if you really like a property, then get it done even before the cooling off period, if that agent will let you do it. If not, make it a condition of the contract and get it done. But either way, definitely make sure that you can get it done and can exit if there's structural issues, termite issues, who knows.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Second question. Looking at purchasing an investment property, the two options are to push ourselves to the limit for a house in the best suburb, or to buy a house that's a little bit cheaper, a few suburbs away. What would be your opinion?
Ooh. So that's really going to come down to the area that we're looking at here. That's a rough one. Look, what I would say is when someone says best suburb, I'm always curious, what do they mean by that, right? Because when someone says the best suburb, it might be because they like it. It's got the nicest cafes and parks and whatever else. Okay, that's great. But is it really the best suburb from a capital growth perspective? Okay. Personally, I don't like to redline anyone's budget because you don't really want to push yourself. You need to have funds put aside for a rainy day. So unless you think you can top that up and create a new savings buffer, I'd probably be saying look at a few of the suburbs further away. But again, without knowing more, I couldn't give you a categorical answer. But just from someone's personal situation, you want buffers, you want leeway. Life happens to people along this journey.
Yeah, cool. And last one. So we're looking for an investment property advice.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everyone, I'm looking to buy an investment property, but I'm approaching this purely by numbers. I don't care where the property is in Australia. I don't need to manage it myself, and I may never see it. What strategies have worked for you? Are there any key metrics or indicators that you swear by, and what are the pitfalls to avoid? So quite a big question there.
Yeah, big chunky question there. So look, this is something that obviously a lot of clients seek out our help with here. So sort of let me walk you through how we would do it. Number one, obviously budget is going to be the first thing. Where are we looking at? Number two, what's your cash flow profile? So you might say 700 grand, but if you need a property that's going to be cash flow neutral at 700 grand versus maybe if you can afford, I don't know, $1,000, $1,500 negative per month, that's going to free up options because ultimately you want capital growth and rental growth. The key thing you want to do is find areas where demand from owner occupiers is stronger than available supply so that you can get the stronger growth over time and then take that property, take out the equity and go again. So you want the capital growth, you want the rental growth as well to help you with the cash flow, keep supporting your borrowing capacity. What indicators are you looking at for that? There's a couple of key ones that I always swear by. Number one, vacancy rates. I want to see vacancy rate below 3%, preferably below 2.5%. That means a stronger rental demand than available supply of rentals, which means you'll get your property rented quickly and rents are likely to rise. Then we want to see what's the owner occupancy rates. So is this an area that's mainly tenanted, like a small mining town somewhere, which means there's not much demand from people wanting to move into an area? That's highly volatile. I want to see owner occupiers moving into the area. And then I really want to see, look at buying or selling activity. In other words, are properties selling more quickly today than they were 12 months ago? Because if that's the case, that means there's generally more buyers in the market relative to the number of properties than there were 12 months ago, which will normally point towards property price rises. So if you look at those three indicators and then look at just the jobs growth in the area, what's employment like, the odds are, you'll go a long way to getting this correct.
Awesome. Niro, thanks for your time, mate. That's our
Thank you.
half-hour episode complete, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Ross.
Cheers.